The floor was hard, but I said nothing. I lay down carefully, easing my hip against the rolled yoga mat like I was settling into something temporary. That's what Nate kept calling it, temporary. There's no room on the couch tonight, he said, glancing over his shoulder. Jen's back is acting up again. He gestured to the corner of the living room, where he'd set out a thin blanket and the mat, as if I were a guest arriving late to a sleepover. I smiled, too quickly, and nodded. Like it didn't matter. Like I was grateful just to be allowed in. Jen was already upstairs. I heard her voice behind the closed door, low and irritated. I caught words, she's always in the kitchen, and her things smell like mothballs. It wasn't said cruelly. But it wasn't kind, either. It never is, when people begin to edit their tone rather than their words. In the dim light of their living room, surrounded by neutral furniture and throw pillows embroidered with words like home and blessed, I sat quietly on the mat, back against the wall. I'd brought a casserole that morning. I thought it might help. Jen had scraped it into the bin after dinner, said it had too much salt. They thought I didn't hear. I always hear. And something inside me shifted. Not quite sadness. Not yet anger. Just a slow unraveling. A quiet knowing. This wasn't temporary. This was a beginning of a kind I hadn't expected. I married Doug in 1983, a spring wedding on the outskirts of Wichita. He wore a gray suit with a crooked tie, and I wore my mother's lace. My shoes pinched, but I didn't care. I thought I was starting a life that would make me someone's center. He was funny back then, not loud funny, but the kind of dry wit that worked best in parking lots and long drives. I liked that. He wanted to teach history, he said. But the job market dried up before we ever unpacked our wedding gifts. Then came the transfer to Kansas City. I was accepted into a graduate program that fall, English literature, a full scholarship. I gave it up without ceremony. Just packed my notebooks and sent a polite letter withdrawing from the program. Because Doug needed the move. Because it felt like the right thing to do. Because that's what love does. I told myself I could go back. I never did. Nate was born 2 years later. I stayed home. It made sense, financially. Doug's job had benefits. We agreed it would only be for a little while, just until things settled. They never do, though. Life doesn't wait for you to get steady. Instead, it just barrels forward. So I baked birthday cakes shaped like dinosaurs, made Halloween costumes from scratch, and hosted every PTA bake sale because I was so organized. People loved to say that, how capable I was. How nice. No one ever asked what I wanted to be. Only what I could do for them. Doug's parents needed care in the late 90s, and we brought them in. I gave up the guest room, the sewing space I'd carved out for myself. He said we'd be heroes. Said it would only be for a year. They stayed until they died, one in 2003, the other in 2007. I held their hands at the end. Made sure their hair was brushed, their teeth cleaned, their pillows fluffed. Doug thanked me with flowers once. Carnations from the grocery store. When Nate turned 12, Doug started working longer hours. The company was growing. He took pride in that. I stopped asking about the late nights. Stopped counting the missing hours. What was the point? Life had become a river I couldn't step out of. You don't realize how long you've been swimming until your limbs go numb. I kept the house running. I paid the bills, made the meals, taught myself how to fix the garbage disposal when it broke. Doug bought a new car the year I turned 50. I got a vacuum. He said it was a fancy one. He laughed when he said it, like it was a joke. I laughed, too. When he got sick in 2014, it was slow. The kind of sick that doesn't ring alarms right away. Just quiet fatigue, weight loss, missed appointments. I knew something was wrong before the doctors confirmed it. By the time they said the word terminal, I'd already started keeping folders. Organizing bills. Calling insurance. It took 2 years. I didn't cry at the funeral. I cried when I unpacked his toothbrush a week later, still damp from the last time he'd used it. That was when it hit me. Not just the loss of Doug, but the loss of my function. Of my reason for being. People brought casseroles for 2 weeks. After that, the calls stopped. Nate visited a few times. Said I could come stay with them for a while. Just until you get your footing, he'd said. I smiled. I always do. I sold the house for less than it was worth. Didn't want to negotiate. Didn't want to wait. I packed 30 years of life into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. Left behind the dining set where we'd eaten every Christmas meal, the dresser with my mother's perfume still tucked in the back drawer. Took only what I thought I'd need. I kept my teacups, though. I don't know why. Something about the delicate shape. The way they felt like ceremony, even when I was alone. Nate asked why I bothered. You can't microwave those, he said, laughing. I said nothing. The first week in their house, Jen was friendly. She made me tea, mugs, not cups, and asked about Doug. I thought she meant it. Maybe she did. But kindness has a shelf life. It always does, when it's offered out of obligation. I learned to keep out of the way. Woke early to clean the kitchen before she came downstairs. Tried not to touch anything. Asked before using the dryer. Nate said I didn't need to ask. But Jen noticed when I didn't. She started labeling shelves in the fridge. Told me it was, just to help with organization. Then she labeled the pantry. Then the laundry baskets. One night, I moved my teacups to the far back of the cupboard so she'd stop complaining about the clutter. I found them the next morning in a box in the garage. I thought we could donate those, she said, smiling. They're a little fragile. I nodded. Took the box upstairs. Hid it under the bed. It's strange how invisibility doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow fade. Like a photograph left in sunlight. You don't notice the loss until you're trying to make out the face. And now I'm sleeping on a yoga mat in my son's living room. The mat is pink, a faded color that once meant calm. It smells faintly of dog. I don't know if it was ever used for yoga. I heard Nate and Jen in the kitchen this morning. She whispered something about a community center. They have resources for women like her, she said. Nate grunted. Rooms, even, he replied. Like I was a stray cat needing placement. I stared at the ceiling as they spoke. Counted the shadows made by the morning light cutting through their blinds. I used to wake early for Doug. To make him coffee before work. He liked it black with 1 sugar. Jen drinks oat milk lattes. I offered to make one, once. She smiled. Said she'd rather not. Yesterday, I found a folded newspaper clipping on the counter. A job listing circled in blue pen. Receptionist. 3 nights a week. Minimum wage. Someone had written, might be a good fit, in cursive I didn't recognize. Jen, probably. Her handwriting is tidy and controlled. I folded the clipping and placed it in the drawer with the spare batteries. I didn't throw it away. That would feel petty. I just didn't want it looking at me every time I poured my tea. Nate thinks he's being helpful. He really does. That's the hardest part. He's not cruel, not openly. Just, thoughtless. Efficient. Jen is polite. Always polite. But her glances give her away. She sees me the way you see a sweater left on the back of a chair too long. At first, it's comfort. Then it's clutter. Then it's gone. I remember holding Nate when he was feverish. 4 years old, soaked in sweat from some childhood virus. I held him through the night, humming nonsense songs, pressing cool cloths to his forehead. He cried for me when Doug tried to take over. No, he sobbed. I want mommy. Now he doesn't ask how I slept. Doesn't ask if I need anything. He thinks kindness is letting me stay. He doesn't see the yoga mat. But I do. I see it every night. Every morning. I smooth it out with care, as if respecting the space will earn me more of it. I don't know what I'm waiting for anymore. A signal, maybe. Or an ending. Or maybe, finally, a beginning. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of gray, damp morning that makes everything feel heavier. I was folding Jen's towels, she liked them done a certain way, and Nate came downstairs still in his work clothes from the night before. He'd fallen asleep on the couch watching the news. I handed him a coffee. You sleep okay? I asked. He shrugged. Didn't get much. Jen's not feeling great again. He didn't ask how I'd slept, though he knew I'd been in the corner again. The couch was unavailable for the 3rd week in a row. Jen's back. Always Jen's back. I told myself she was in pain. That it wasn't personal. But I couldn't help noticing that the pillows had started showing up on the floor before I even walked into the room, as if claiming the space before I dared. That's when he said it. Offhand, casual. Like he was mentioning the weather. There's a community center for women like you. They've got programs. Rooms, even. I looked at him, blinking. Women like me. He didn't answer. Just drank his coffee. Then, as if it would sweeten the sting, he added, might be a good way to meet people. People. As if I were lonely. I wasn't. I was exhausted. Not from being alone, but from pretending I was welcome. I nodded. Didn't argue. That's what they preferred. A mother who smiled and nodded. Later that night, when I cleared the dinner dishes, I saw the folded paper on the counter. A job posting clipped from the local paper. Jen subscribed mostly for the Sunday coupons. The listing was circled in blue ink. Receptionist needed. 3 nights a week. Evening hours. No benefits. Minimum wage. In Jen's handwriting, beneath the ad, might be a good fit. I looked at the neat curve of her cursive. She had a teacher's penmanship. Controlled, practiced. She probably didn't even realize how it read. Or maybe she did. That's the thing about people like Jen, so careful with how they present things that even their condescension sounds like advice. I folded the clipping neatly and put it in the drawer under the sink, behind the dish gloves. It didn't belong on the counter, pretending to be a helpful suggestion. It was a message. Start contributing. I began to notice other things. Small, quiet nudges. Jen asked me not to run the dishwasher until it was full, even though I'd already checked and it was. She said the water bill had gone up since I moved in. Nate asked if I'd mind picking up some groceries, just a few essentials. Milk, eggs, a specific brand of cereal that I knew cost twice as much as the store brand. I paid without comment. That week, they went out to dinner with friends. I stayed home and cleaned the fridge. I found a sticky note on the orange juice the next morning. Please don't open new bottles until the old ones are finished. Thanks. A smiley face at the end. Always a smiley face. It wasn't that they wanted me gone. Not exactly. It was that they wanted me to be smaller. Quieter. Easier to absorb into their routines. They wanted a version of me that stayed out of the way, contributed silently, and didn't ask questions. Doug used to do that, too. When he'd had a long day and didn't want to talk. When he'd shrug off my plans as too much fuss. When he'd joke about how I could talk the paint off a wall. I'd thought it was affection. Now I understood it was preference. A preference for silence. I spent the evenings rereading the letters Doug had written during our first year of marriage, back when he still called me Shell, and ended every note with a little sketch of the sun. They were sweet. Earnest. He was still trying then. Still unsure of his place in the world. So was I. I found one letter where he'd written, "I know we're just getting started, but I already feel like you make everything steadier." That's what I'd been for both of them, Doug and Nate. A steadying force. Unseen, like ballast in a ship. You only notice it when it's gone. But I was still here. And slowly, I was starting to see the outlines of something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. Not just that I was unwelcome. But that I'd been recast entirely. No longer the center of anyone's orbit. Just a fixture. A piece of furniture they were too polite to move but already mentally discarding. One morning, Jen forgot I was in the kitchen and asked Nate, "Have you looked into getting her on some kind of assistance? I think they do that now for seniors." He shushed her, but not out of disagreement. Just timing. They didn't want to seem ungrateful. That was important to them. The appearance of kindness. That afternoon, I walked to the library. They had armchairs near the window and a small table where I sometimes did crossword puzzles. The woman behind the desk, Alice, always smiled at me. Meant it, too. I could tell. I sat for a long time, watching a mother read to her toddler. The boy kept interrupting, excited, pointing at the pictures. She let him. Didn't correct or hush him. Just smiled and read slower. I remembered doing that with Nate. The Hungry Caterpillar, until I had it memorized. He loved the pages with the holes. Called it, the Bug Book. He'd once told me I was the smartest person he knew. He cried when I dropped him off at kindergarten. Clung to my scarf. I stood outside the classroom, listening to him calm down before walking home. Now he reminded me to rinse out the sink after washing lettuce, because it gets gritty. I stared at my hands. Still strong, still capable. A little more weathered than they used to be. But not used up. Something in me hardened that day. Not bitterness. Something quieter. Firmer. Like a stone settling in the foundation of a house. I walked to the community center. Not because I needed a room. I just wanted to see it. A yellow building behind the train tracks, with faded paint and a sagging roof. Inside, a woman at the desk handed me a flyer for the senior meals program. "We do bingo nights, too," she said brightly. I thanked her and left. On the way home, I passed a small strip mall with a sign in the window, "Legal services, free consultations." Something made me stop. The woman inside looked up as I entered. Late 50s. Sharp eyes. She smiled. "I'm not in trouble," I said quickly. "Just curious." "You wouldn't be the first." She offered me tea. The office smelled like lemon cleaner and carpet glue. I told her my situation in broad strokes. She asked if I had any assets. I said no. "Not unless you counted memories." She smiled. We talked for nearly an hour. By the time I left, my head buzzed with information I hadn't known I needed. Tenant law. Family leases. Personal protections. Rights. The next morning, I called a financial planner listed on the library bulletin board. The woman on the line sounded young but confident. "Of course we can meet," she said. "Your name?" I gave it. "Do you have any current income?" Not yet, I said. But I will. I didn't tell Nate or Jen about the meetings. Or the second call I made to the county clerk's office. Or the third, to the property manager who handled the house they were renting. Because I'd remembered something that had escaped me in all the years of being helpful, invisible, and accommodating. I had always made things happen. Quietly. Without thanks. Without drama. I hadn't vanished. I'd just been buried. But I was still here. And I was ready to be seen again. It was raining that day. A soft, endless drizzle that seemed to soak through everything without ever turning to a real storm. I had just come back from the library, where I'd spent the morning pretending to read. What I was really doing was sitting near the windows, watching the street, feeling something move inside me that I hadn't dared name yet. Clara had left a message. My financial planner. I hadn't told Nate or Jen about her, of course. They thought I spent my time knitting or watching cooking shows on mute. I'd made the first appointment with Clara 2 months ago, right after Jen left that job listing on the counter. I had read it once. Receptionist. 3 nights a week. Minimum wage. Then I folded it neatly and put it in the bottom drawer under the sink, behind the dishcloths. When I saw Clara's name flash on my phone that afternoon, I stepped outside into the drizzle and answered. It's time, she said. They're ready to sell. The family just wants to be done with it. I leaned against the lamppost. The wind carried a sharp edge. The owner passed. 2 months ago. The children inherited it. None of them live in the city. They've agreed to a cash deal. The paperwork's in motion. If we move quickly, you can own it in under 3 weeks. I didn't smile. Didn't sigh. I just said, good. That night, I made dinner as usual. Roasted vegetables and chicken thighs, lemon and rosemary. Jen said nothing about the food, just picked at it like she always did. Nate scrolled on his phone, half listening to the news. We might need to look at new places soon, Jen said, not looking up. Still haven't heard back from the landlord. Nate nodded. We'll figure it out. I kept my hands steady as I dried the dishes. They didn't know I'd already figured it out. That the landlord they were waiting on had stopped being relevant the moment Clara filed the offer. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, just the opposite. My mind had gone still, clear in a way I hadn't felt in years. Like ice. Precise, focused. I lay there thinking not about revenge, but about space. Walls. Ownership. The feeling of walking into a room and knowing you belonged in it. 2 days later, I transferred the funds. Clara had arranged everything. We'd sold Doug's old bonds, liquidated a modest investment account he'd opened in the 90s and forgotten about. I'd signed the final paperwork in a quiet office above a bakery. The lawyer offered me coffee and called me ma'am in a way that made me feel exactly my age, and not a day more. Once it was done, I walked outside and bought myself a croissant. I sat on a bench across from a playground and watched the children run between puddles. No one knew who I was. I liked that. The house wasn't fancy. A 2-story colonial with old pipes and squeaky floors. But it had sunlight in the mornings, and the windows opened wide without sticking. I'd memorized the layout from the realtor photos. The bedroom upstairs had pale blue walls and a door that actually locked. I didn't move in. Not yet. I kept sleeping on the yoga mat, folding my blanket, making coffee, saying thank you. I didn't want to tip my hand. Not until the deed had been recorded, the title transferred, the keys in my purse. On the morning it became mine, I woke early. I dressed carefully. Blouse, cardigan, the brooch Doug's mother had given me years ago. I made tea. Sat quietly until I saw the mail carrier slip the envelope through the slot. It was thick. Manila. Official. I opened it alone in the downstairs bathroom, the only place I had privacy. I flipped through the pages. Every line confirmed it, the house was mine. Not rented. Not borrowed. Owned. That afternoon, Clara called to confirm. "It's done," she said. "You're the legal owner as of 10:03 this morning." "Thank you," I said. "Do you want me to send over the notice?" I hesitated. "No," I said. "I'll deliver it myself." I wanted to see their faces. The next day, I waited until after breakfast. Jen was upstairs. Nate was watching television, his feet on the coffee table. I stood in the hallway holding a folder. My hands were steady. "Nate," I said. He turned, distracted. "Yeah. There's something you should see." He took the folder, opening it without looking up. He flipped through the first page. The second. His eyes narrowed. "What is this?" "A change in property ownership," I said. "You'll be dealing with me from now on." He blinked. "Wait, what?" "I bought the house." His head snapped up. "You bought this house?" I nodded. "Yes." He looked down again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less absurd. Jen came downstairs, phone in hand. "What's going on?" "She bought the house," Nate said. Jen laughed once, a dry, incredulous sound. "You're joking." "No," I said. "I thought I might renovate. Maybe keep a tenant or two. Temporarily." They stared at me. No anger yet, just confusion. Like I'd spoken a language they didn't recognize. "But how?" Nate asked. "With what money?" "Does it matter?" I said. I watched it register. The shift in their posture. The dawning realization that the rules had changed. "You can't just." "I can," I said. And I did. I left the folder on the table. "I'll be moving into the main bedroom. You can stay. I'll draw up a lease. It'll be fair. Temporary." Jen's mouth opened, but no words came. I didn't wait for approval. I walked upstairs, past their silence, suitcase already packed. I'd done it in secret, bit by bit, when they weren't home. Not because I was hiding. But because I didn't want to explain. In the bedroom, I unpacked. Laid out my clothes. Hung the brooch on the corner of the mirror. I opened the window. The room smelled faintly of Jen's hairspray. I would fix that. Give it time. The next morning, I made breakfast. Set the table for 3. Nate came downstairs, still dazed. He poured coffee, sat down. Jen didn't join us. I didn't ask why. Nate looked at me across the table. "You really did it." I buttered my toast. "I did. Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him. "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer. "I didn't do it to punish you," I said. "I did it to stop asking permission to exist." He put down his mug. "What happens now?" "I live here," I said. "You can, too. For now. But on my terms." He nodded. Slowly. "Okay." Outside, the rain had stopped. The light was soft, coming in through the windows just right. The house felt different. Like it had finally exhaled. I cleaned that day. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. I cleared the yoga mat from the corner. I didn't throw it away. I kept it, folded neatly in the linen closet. I wanted to remember what it felt like to sleep on a floor in a house I didn't own. I wanted to remember exactly where I stood when I decided I never would again. I didn't redecorate right away. That wasn't the point. I didn't need to paint the walls or replace the curtains to claim the space. I needed to live in it. To breathe in it. To feel my own footsteps without apology. I started with the bedroom. Quietly. I bought new sheets, white with blue embroidery. I donated the heavy comforter Jen had picked out during some Black Friday sale. I opened the windows, even when it was cold. I needed the air. Something real. The first night in the bed felt strange. Like wearing someone else's coat. But by morning, it fit. The sunlight came in soft over the dresser. I'd forgotten how different things looked from above floor level. I stretched my legs. No cramps. No stiff hip. My back didn't ache. I made coffee, not out of routine, but out of want. I used my teacups. I sat at the kitchen table and drank slowly. No one rushed me. That afternoon, I moved the yoga mat to the top shelf of the hall closet. I didn't hide it. I left it where I could see it. A kind of quiet exhibit. Nate still looked at me sideways when we passed in the hall. Jen avoided me. She had started sleeping in the guest room 2 nights before. She claimed it was allergies. I didn't ask. The lease took a week to prepare. Clara helped me draft it. Standard terms. Month to month. Market rate, but fair. I left a copy on the kitchen table beside a note, let me know if you have questions. M. The next morning, Nate brought it to me in the living room. You're serious, he said. Yes. I thought this was just about making a point. No. This is about balance. He didn't argue. He read the lease. He signed it. Jen didn't. She left 3 days later, suitcase in hand, lips pressed tight. She didn't say goodbye. I didn't expect her to. Nate stayed. He started small. Washed his own dishes. Took out the trash without being asked. Asked if I needed anything when he went to the store. Once, I came downstairs and found him folding laundry. My laundry. I said, that's not necessary. He said, I know. He didn't stop. He started coming home earlier. No more falling asleep on the couch. He asked questions about dinner. Can I help? At first, I said no. Then one night I handed him a cutting board and told him to dice the onions. He did. Poorly. But he tried. There were no apologies. Just a kind of soft reshaping. I didn't try to win him back. I didn't need to. I hadn't left. I simply stopped begging to be seen. He asked about Doug once. Out of nowhere. What would Dad have thought about all this? I was quiet a moment. I think he would have been proud, I said. Eventually. He nodded. He never talked about money. I always thought things were tight. They weren't, I said. But he liked people thinking they were. It made the expectations quieter. Nate looked down at his hands. I wish he'd told me more. He tried, I said. But you were always sure you already knew everything. He didn't argue. Just nodded. One afternoon, I received a call from Clara. The check from the property management company had cleared. The former owners had received their funds. The title was recorded. All official. Do you want to come by the office? She asked. I have something for you. When I arrived, she handed me a small silver key on a ribbon. You already have access, she said. But I thought you deserved something symbolic. I held the key in my palm for a long time. It was warm from her hand. Heavier than I expected. I said, thank you. For what? For treating me like a person. Clara smiled. You've always been a person. You just finally started acting like one who knew it. That night, I held the key while I made tea. I didn't say anything out loud. But I thought about the girl I'd been at 20, sitting on Doug's hand-me-down couch, wondering if I'd made a mistake marrying so young. I thought about the woman I'd been at 30, rocking Nate in the middle of the night, aching and half asleep, but sure I was doing something important. I thought about the mother I'd been at 50, waving goodbye at the airport as he left for college, proud and terrified in equal measure. And I thought about the woman I was now. 63. Alone in some ways. But more myself than I'd ever been. I slept well that night. I stopped cooking every night. I started going on walks in the evening, just before sunset. I let Nate make his own meals sometimes. I didn't ask where he was going or when he'd be back. I took up crossword puzzles again. Started borrowing novels from the library. Fiction. I hadn't read fiction in years. It used to feel like a luxury. Now it felt like oxygen. I met a woman at the library one Tuesday. Her name was Ruth. She wore a denim jacket and had a laugh that startled everyone in the room. We sat together one afternoon in the reading room, both pretending not to listen to a toddler's meltdown in the children's corner. Your grandson? She asked. I shook my head. Just a stranger. She nodded. Same here. But I still want to go over there and offer raisins. We laughed. That kind of real, surprised laugh you forget your body can make. We had lunch the next week. Soup and bread at a small place near the bus station. She told me about her garden. I told her about my yoga mat. She didn't laugh. Sometimes the most dangerous things, she said, are the ones that wear a polite face. I looked at her. Yes. At home, Nate was changing, too. Slowly. But noticeably. He asked more questions. Not about logistics. About me. My past. My likes. My memories. He asked if I wanted to go to the farmer's market one Saturday. We went. He bought peaches. I bought a bunch of sunflowers and put them in a chipped vase on the kitchen table. We didn't talk about Jen. Not directly. But one evening, he asked, "Did I hurt you?" "Yes," I said. "But not in the way you think." He waited. "You treated me like I was optional. Like my worth depended on how quietly I fit into your life." He nodded, slowly. "I'm sorry. I'm not looking for an apology," I said. "I just need you to understand the weight of it." "I do now," he said. And I believed him. One morning, I found a small envelope on the table. No name, just, "For you." Inside was a note in Nate's handwriting. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I folded it and tucked it into my drawer. I didn't mention it. I didn't need to. The victory wasn't loud. It didn't come with celebration or tears. It came with peace. With choices. With the quiet certainty that I'd changed the story, not by shouting, but by stepping back into the center of it. By reclaiming the house, I hadn't taken something from them. I'd returned something to myself. When Jen left, it wasn't a dramatic scene. There was no suitcase by the door, no slamming of drawers or raised voices. She just quietly started disappearing from rooms, then from whole evenings, and finally, she was gone. Nate told me in a roundabout way, saying Jen would be staying with her sister for a while, but I could see in the way her shoes and coat vanished from the hallway closet, and the fact that she never called or texted, that she had left for good. There was a time I would have mourned that, would have reached out to her with apologies or small olive branches, tried to smooth things over even when I hadn't done anything wrong. But not now. Now, I saw it for what it was, a retreat, a way for her to escape what she couldn't control. Nate didn't talk much about it. In the weeks after Jen left, he moved around the house more quietly than before, careful not to intrude on my routines, almost as if he was waiting for me to tell him what came next. He was polite, almost formal. For the first few days, he'd even send me a text if he was going to be late getting home from work, something he hadn't bothered to do when Jen was here. I suppose it was his way of showing respect. Or maybe just his way of showing he understood that the balance of things had changed. We had settled into a kind of rhythm. I cooked dinner 3 or 4 nights a week, and he'd either join me or make something simple for himself if he was working late. Sometimes we'd eat together at the kitchen table, neither of us saying much, just sharing the space. Other nights, we'd pass each other like neighbors, a nod, a good night, nothing more. There was no tension, just a careful civility, as if we both understood the value of keeping the peace. There were moments, though, when I caught him watching me. I'd look up from the newspaper or from chopping vegetables and find him standing in the doorway, as if he had something to ask but wasn't sure how. Eventually, he started asking small things. Did I need anything from the store? Did I want help folding laundry? Did I mind if he used the car to visit a friend on Sunday? He never assumed. He always asked. One afternoon, he found me in the backyard, weeding the patch of dirt that Jen had once called her herb garden but never really kept up. He stood there awkwardly, hands in his pockets. I was thinking about putting in some tomatoes this year. What do you think? It wasn't really about the tomatoes. It was about asking my opinion, about admitting that my presence mattered in ways he'd forgotten for a while. I said it was a good idea, and together we cleaned out the beds, pulling up old roots and turning the soil. He talked about work, small annoyances, office gossip, things he'd never bothered to share with me before. I listened. I didn't offer advice. He didn't ask for it. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear him in the kitchen, making tea or a sandwich, and I'd remember when he was small and used to sneak down for cookies after bedtime, thinking he was fooling me. Now, he moved just as quietly, but for different reasons. Out of respect. Out of uncertainty. Maybe even guilt. One evening, after we'd finished dinner and I was clearing the table, he asked, "Do you ever wish you'd done things differently? Not just with the house, but with Dad, with me, with all of it?" His voice was low, almost hesitant. I took my time answering. Everyone has regrets, Nate. But wishing things different doesn't change what was done. All you can do is learn from it. Do better the next time life gives you the chance. He seemed to take that in, nodding slowly. I could see he was struggling to find his place, to figure out who he was to me now. I didn't try to make it easier for him, but I didn't make it harder either. He started asking more questions, about the past, about my parents, about how I met Doug, about what I used to dream of before life became so practical and ordinary. I answered honestly. Sometimes he listened, sometimes he drifted off, but I appreciated the effort. It was more than I'd had in years. One night, I woke to the sound of rain on the roof, and realized that for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt settled. There was a steadiness in the walls, in the way the furniture sat, in the way I moved from room to room without thinking about whether I was in someone else's way. I started making small changes, new curtains in the living room, a rug for the hallway, a coat of paint on the front door. Nate noticed. He said nothing, but he noticed. He started taking better care of his own things, picking up after himself, contributing to groceries without being asked. The yoga mat stayed in the closet. Every so often, I'd see it when I reached for towels, and I'd remember what it felt like to sleep on it, to lie awake and listen to the sounds of a house that didn't feel like mine. But now, it was just a reminder. A measure of how far things had come. I joined a writing group at the local library, something I'd always meant to do but never had the time or confidence for before. I wrote about ordinary things, gardens, recipes, old family stories. Sometimes, I wrote about what it felt like to be invisible, to be overlooked, to come back from that. The group was small, mostly women like me, older, with more behind them than ahead. We laughed, sometimes we cried, but mostly we listened to each other in ways our families never seemed to. Nate asked about the group. He wanted to know if I liked it, if I was writing anything real. I showed him a story once. He read it quietly and handed it back. "That's good," he said. "You should keep doing it." There were setbacks. Some days, he'd snap, old habits rising to the surface. He'd forget to tell me he was having friends over, or leave the kitchen a mess after midnight. But now, I spoke up. Calmly. Firmly. "Please clean up after yourself." Or, "Let me know if you're bringing people home, so I'm not surprised." He'd apologize. Not defensively, just genuinely. Then he'd fix it. Bit by bit, the dynamic shifted. Not all at once, not with speeches or big moments, but through small acts of mutual respect. I no longer felt like I was imposing. He no longer seemed to view me as an inconvenience. We began to coexist, not as mother and dependent child, but as two adults sharing a home. I realized that this was as close to peace as I was likely to get. Not perfect harmony, not a fairy tale, but an honest, working truce. I didn't ask for more. I didn't need to. And in the growing comfort of those quiet weeks, I understood the value of silence, not as surrender, but as a kind of power. The power to choose when and how to speak. The power to walk through my own front door and know that I belonged, not because someone allowed me to, but because I decided so myself. I learned, in the months that followed, that peace doesn't arrive like a holiday or a thunderclap. It settles, slow and ordinary, in the shape of quiet mornings and unhurried evenings. Some days, I found myself surprised by the calm, almost suspicious of it. After years of measuring my movements, of living half aware that I might be in someone's way, the silence felt new, almost delicate. But I settled into it, day by day, learning the difference between loneliness and solitude, between absence and freedom. By spring, the house had changed. My touch was everywhere, not as an act of conquest but of quiet reclaiming. I planted geraniums in the front pots, bright red against the fading paint. I moved the old sideboard to the dining room, where sunlight reached it for the first time in years. I unpacked the boxes of teacups and found places for each one, some on the shelves, some in the cabinet, one by the window filled with violets. The yoga mat remained in the closet, tucked out of sight but never forgotten. I liked knowing it was there, a reminder, not of shame, but of how I'd come through. Nate still lived in the house. At first, I wondered how it would work, two adults learning to coexist after years of mismatched roles and quiet resentments. But something had shifted in both of us. The old rules had broken and not been rebuilt. Now, we spoke to each other directly. If something bothered me, I said so. If I needed help, I asked. He did the same. There were no more whispered negotiations in the kitchen, no more small acts of avoidance disguised as kindness. On Saturdays, we shopped together at the farmer's market. I let him choose the fruit, watched him squeeze peaches and frown over prices like his father used to. I picked out fresh bread, and sometimes, when I felt brave, a wedge of cheese from the expensive stall. We didn't talk about the past, not about Jen, not about the years I'd spent shrinking myself to fit. The market was a place for the present, for simple pleasures and new habits. I learned to enjoy the weight of a full bag of groceries on my arm, the smell of flowers and coffee, the sound of people talking and laughing around us. At home, the kitchen became ours, not hers or mine. Nate started to cook more often. He experimented, sometimes with mixed results, but always with a quiet kind of focus. I gave advice if he asked, and only then. One evening, he made roast chicken and potatoes and set the table for two, lighting a candle he found in a drawer. We ate together, laughing over his lopsided gravy, and I realized how long it had been since a meal had felt like a gift instead of a duty. My writing group at the library became a constant. Every Thursday morning, I walked the short distance to the brick building, past neighbors I barely knew but now greeted with a wave. I wrote stories, some true, some invented, about women who disappeared and reappeared, about houses that remembered, about mothers and daughters who learned, too late, to say what they really meant. The other women listened, sometimes quietly, sometimes with knowing smiles, and in their company, I found a kind of validation I hadn't known I needed. As the days grew longer, I felt the change inside me most in the small, unexpected ways. I slept better, waking without the heaviness that used to cling for hours. I began to look forward to mornings, to the promise of sunlight on the walls, the comfort of my own bed. I found satisfaction in routine tasks, sweeping the porch, watering the geraniums, dusting the bookshelves. There was a pleasure in care, not because it was required or expected, but because I chose it. Nate paid his rent on time. He thanked me when I fixed the washing machine, asked my advice about a problem at work, brought home flowers every few weeks without a word. We talked sometimes late into the evening, usually about nothing important, the news, a movie we'd both seen, a story from his childhood I hadn't heard in years. He apologized once, not in so many words, but in the way he looked at me, steady and a little lost, and said, "I should have noticed more. I should have made space." I told him that was all right. That we were both learning how to be people again, not just roles. As for Jen, I never heard from her. She didn't write, didn't call, and I found I was fine with that. I didn't wish her ill. I simply stopped thinking about what she thought of me. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. The house became a place of comfort, not of tension. I hosted my writing group for tea once, filling the living room with laughter and voices, feeling the warmth of company that asked for nothing but presence. I put up new curtains in the guest room. Sometimes, late in the afternoon, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the world go by. I remembered the hard floor and the cold mornings, but I didn't dwell on them. They were part of my story, but not the only part. The victory wasn't dramatic. It wasn't about owning the house or setting the rules, though those things mattered. The victory was smaller, steadier. It was in the way I no longer waited for permission to speak, to move, to exist inside my own life. It was in the sense of rightness that grew, day by day, as I claimed my place, not with noise or anger, but with the quiet persistence of someone who finally knows her own worth. One evening, I stood in the hallway, looking at the family photos I'd rehung along the stairs. There were pictures of Nate as a baby, of Doug laughing in the old backyard, of birthdays and holidays and ordinary afternoons. I saw myself in them too, sometimes at the edge, sometimes at the center, always present. I thought about the years that had gone, about what I had lost and what I had found. I didn't feel regret. I felt gratitude, for the lessons, for the strength I'd had to gather when everything else seemed to be slipping away. As summer approached, I started to plan a small garden in the backyard. Not ambitious, just a few tomatoes, maybe some herbs, a patch of zinnias for color. I told Nate my plans one morning, over coffee, and he offered to help dig the beds. I accepted, knowing we would argue about the best way to plant, but looking forward to it anyway. This is how life remakes itself, not all at once, not with grand gestures, but with 100 small choices to stay, to try, to reach for more. I wasn't young anymore, and the world had taught me about disappointment and betrayal, but it had also given me this, the knowledge that it's never too late to claim your own space, to start again, to insist on your own dignity. I had made mistakes, yes. I had given too much, stayed silent too long, accepted too little in return. But I had also survived. I had learned. I had changed. Now, as the sunlight filled my kitchen and the sound of Nate's voice drifted from another room, I felt the old anxieties slip away. I stood tall, unhurried, and certain of my place. The house was mine, not just on paper but in spirit, and I was no longer a guest. I was home.